Hello, this is a cultural comparison between Italy and the United States. We will be using the Globe Cultural Model, which features 9 different dimensions of culture to dissect how Italy and the United States may be different or similar and how this might affect their teamwork, motivation, and communication, as well as how we can integrate our faith into these cultural phenomenons. I chose to study Italy for the duration of this class and to use it as my cultural comparison because it is a country I've always been very, very interested in. It has such a rich history and so many well known landmarks, and the food just seems to be such a staple. I'm really interested in being able to know more about the culture, and I'm hoping next summer to be going to visit there actually, so it's a perfect time to try to learn more about what I will see when I go there. Italy is located in the Mediterranean region of Europe. The Globe Project categorizes them into the Latin Europe country cluster when they talk about different cultural aspects. As for the actual people that live in Italy, most of them are born and raised Italians. 92% of the population is 100% Italian. The rest that can be seen are Greek, Albanian, French, German, and Slovenian Italians, as well as some Romanian and Arab refugees. The main religion there is Catholicism, although there are some that practice Protestantism and Judaism. As previously mentioned, the cultural model that will be used in this presentation is the Globe Cultural Model. GLOBE stands for Global Leadership and Organizational Behavior Effectiveness. This research program was established in 1991 and since then has grown to include over 60 countries in its cultural calculations. It features 9 different dimensions, which are performance orientation, assertiveness, future orientation, humane orientation, institutional collectivism, in-group collectivism, gender egalitarianism, power distance, and uncertainty avoidance. On this slide are 2 graphs taken from the Globe Project website of the scores of Italy and US for the different dimensions. The purple shows what the country actually practices, so that is what we're going to focus on. There's not too many differences that are drastic between the US and Italy in these dimensions. They are very, very similar in assertiveness, in-group collectivism, and gender egalitarianism. But the biggest spread is found in the institutional collectivism dimension. Now we will go more in depth with the various dimensions of the GLOBE model, starting with performance orientation. This is defined from a textbook called In the Eye of the Beholder as the degree to which a collective encourages and rewards group members for improvement and excellence. Basically, they get rewarded for their performance. Italy scored in the relatively high dimension, and the US scored in the high dimension. It's not surprising, the US is very performance driven and goal driven, and they're always looking to be able to find the next big thing and to be super efficient with everything they do. And I think when it comes to teamwork between an American and Italian, this can be a very good thing. But because Italy is a little lower in that, they might have slightly less motivation to be more successful and reach more goals. And so that might frustrate the American that they're working with. And whenever frustration comes into the mix, it always makes the communication worse too. That can be very hard to communicate that you're frustrated with your partners because you don't feel like they're maybe working as hard as you, and it's easy for them to get offended if they are hearing that. The next dimension is assertiveness. This is defined as the degree to which individuals are assertive, confrontational, and aggressive in their relationships with others. Basically, are they assertive or are they more passive? And this is one of the dimensions where Italy and the US were both very, very close in how they scored here. They both scored in the medium direction, which means they're both fairly assertive but not overly aggressive in how they conduct themselves. And I think this can be really good for teamwork because both cultures should be more on the same page with how direct they want to be with each other, but still not being maybe too direct where it could be taken in an offensive way, which also just helps with communication so much more when you can just be upfront and nobody's going to take it personal. You can just say what needs to be said and go on with things. And then further on that, motivation always is better when you can be on the same page with who you're working with. Next is the future orientation dimension, which is described as the extent to which individuals engage in future-oriented behaviors such as delaying gratification, planning, and investing in the future. So either a society is very much focused on the future, or they can be focused on the past or the present. It can be one of three. So Italy scored with relatively high. Italy scored in the high range, and the US scored in the relatively high. This is where a big issue could become when an Italian and American are working together. Because Italy's in the high range, they focus very much on trying to prepare for long term, and we're speaking in at least years to maybe decades. The US is relatively high, so they'll look more long term, but they're also very focused on the short term future. So they want to look by quarters of the year or by a year or two. And so this could be tough when communicating, because if an Italian's talking about the future, they may be thinking years, whereas the US, when they're talking about the future, may be thinking a year or less. And then that can also just skew the motivation, because an Italian is looking really long term, and so they're like, oh, we have time, like there's no rush to get anywhere. But the US thinks a little more short term, so they're going to be more motivated to finish things quicker, and there might be a misunderstanding there, which also hurts communication. The fourth dimension of the globe cultural model is humane orientation. The definition, coming again from In the Eye of the Beholder, is the degree to which a collective encourages and rewards individuals for being fair, altruistic, generous, caring, and kind to others. Italy scored in the high range for this, and the US scored relatively high to high. So the US was just slightly lower in their scores than Italy, which is good because there's not a huge spread in mindset differences there. So when these two are working together, when these two cultures work together, there should be a relatively good understanding of being able to be kind to each other while working, and to be generous, and to try to look at things from a fair perspective, which is good when you communicate, because they're going to try to communicate in the best way possible. And they want to be able to work together, and they want it to be rewarding, to be a good experience, which also just always makes motivation so much better. If you're having a good experience and you know that your partners want what's best for you and are trying to get what's best for you, you're more likely to want to work hard for them as well. Next is the in-group collectivism dimension. This is defined as the degree to which individuals express pride, loyalty, and cohesiveness in their organizations or families. This was another dimension where Italy and the United States both scored very, very similarly, and they were both in the high range, which means they both really value being collectivists in their various groups, whether that's in the business or personal areas of life. This is good because when they're working together as a team, that means they will really value being able to be working as a group. So they're going to communicate in the best way they can, because they have pride in the fact that it's an organization that they're a part of. So they're going to be motivated to be able to make this team work the best way possible, even if it's two different cultures working together and they have to learn each other better. They're going to want to do it because they have pride in that. The sixth dimension of the globe model is institutional collectivism, defined as the degree to which organizational and societal institutional practices encourage and reward collective distribution of resources and collective action. So this is kind of how an institution or organization as a whole tries to help others, tries to be more collectivist or individualistic in their ideals. So Italy scores in the relatively high range, but the US scores more in the medium range. This was the biggest spread in scores of any of the dimensions from these two countries. So this is where things might get a little more difficult if those two cultures are working together, because they might be on a project where they have to decide how they're going to distribute certain resources. Italy is going to want to try to distribute them more fairly and reach more people because they see it in a more collectivist way, whereas the US is probably going to be less like that and think more individual minded. How can we help us working in this group? So that can really hurt the teamwork there if they're not going to be able to be on the same page. Communication could get tough because they're going to think kind of opposite ways, and Italy might see it in a way where they're like, oh, the Americans are selfish. They don't want to try to spread this out as much as possible. Whereas the Americans might not necessarily be trying to be selfish, but they're used to an individual driven society because that's how the US is. And so that can hurt motivation always when there's disagreements. And they'll have to find a way to find kind of a middle ground with that. The seventh dimension of the globe cultural model is gender egalitarianism. This is defined as the degree to which a collective minimizes gender inequality. So it's safe to say the vast majority of cultures all across the world are very male driven. And so both Italy and the US scored relatively high for this dimension. But that means that they will be on the same page, which is always good. And it means that they are looking to try to be more equal in how they treat genders. Societies that score high in gender egalitarianism, they always try to involve women more and have them in higher roles. And so if there are Americans and Italians working together and there are females in the group, they should, as a whole, try to respect them more and give them more of a voice, which is so good because that just makes clear communication that, hey, everyone here is equal, whether male or female. And that will help the females stay more motivated because they feel like they do have a voice and they have respect working even amongst men. And that will just make all the teamwork, motivation, communication better. The eighth dimension is power distance. This is the degree to which members of a collective expect power to be distributed equally. Italy scored in the low to relatively low range, and the US was also relatively low. So, again, this is more of a spread than a lot of the other dimensions, but they still score relatively around the same. And so it is good that both Italy and the US are lower in their power distance scores, which, according to In the Eye of the Beholder, means that more information is typically shared in lower power distance societies. So the communication will be better because they don't try to separate different types of communication or have these strict types of groups that are divided. They'll be more cohesive, which makes teamwork so much better. And the motivation should be better when you know that there's a lot of open communication going on. And there's not this huge spread between the leaders of the group and the co-workers, the subsidiaries, so forth. The last dimension is uncertainty avoidance. This is the extent to which a society, organization, or group relies on social norms, rules, and procedures to alleviate unpredictability of future events. These cultures that are high in uncertainty avoidance, they want to control the future and control their present as much as possible. Italy scored in the medium to relatively high range, and the US was in medium range. And so, again, these are not too far off of scores from each culture, so there shouldn't be too much clash there. Although Italy would be more likely to want to prepare for any unpredictable outcomes. And so they might be a little more on edge with that, which could bother the Americans because they want to feel a little more relaxed, just a little bit. And so the communication could get a little frustrated or a little tense there if they're not able to agree on that, which hurts the teamwork automatically and the motivation. But if they can find a way to have the Americans respect the Italians worrying about that and the Italians can try to relax a little bit more, things should work a lot more smoothly for that dimension. Probably the most important concept when talking about culture is being able to integrate faith and how we treat others as believers in Christ. One of the most important commandments given by Jesus himself from Mark 12:31 is to love your neighbor as yourself. That means not just selected neighbors, that means everyone around you. And further on this, we are also called to be peacekeepers. Matthew 5:9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." And in Romans 12:18, it says, "If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all." Now this says to live in peace with all, not just those who are like you. So even when we deal with people from different cultures, we are to be the peacemakers, whether we agree with what they believe or not, because we're not always going to agree with people that we come in contact with, but we are called to love them no matter what, and to be able to find peace among it, just how Jesus did, even when he dealt with people who didn't agree with what he believed in. In conclusion, culture is a very diverse and interesting facet of human beings. It is a beautiful thing to be able to study and understand, and I think it's very important for us, especially as believers, to be able to meet other cultures where they're at and to celebrate our differences and see them as unique and valuable rather than something to separate and divide us. And so with this, it can be so amazing to have these different cultural models so that we can better understand those who are different than us. And that's why it's so important to be able to study culture and be aware of other people. Thank you.